What we're dealing with right now is one of those moments where Lions fans can feel the temperature of the entire league shift, because the noise around Max Crosby isn't just random chatter. It's the kind of rumor that forces a front office to look itself in the mirror and ask how close it really believes this team is. The reporting and the talk coming out make one thing clear. Crosby does not want to be in Las Vegas anymore, and his #1 preferred destination is Detroit. That alone is enough to set this fan base on fire, because we're not talking about a depth piece or a rotational player. We're talking about one of the most dominant defensive players in football, a tone setter, a quarterback hunter who changes game plans the second he steps on the field. When a player like that becomes even remotely available and your team is directly connected to him, there is no way around the conversation. The proposed trade framework that's being discussed gives this rumor real shape. The Lions would be sending away the 17th overall pick in this year's draft, the 4th round pick, and a 2nd round pick next year. In return, Detroit would receive Max Crosby and a 3rd round pick. On paper, that's a massive swing. You are sacrificing premium draft capital, including your stronger, but you are also securing an elite, proven player who is already one of the best at his position in the entire league. This isn't a projection, this isn't hope, this is certainty in terms of on-field impact. Even after that trade, the Lions would still hold multiple picks in this draft, including a 2nd, a 3rd, a 5th, to 6ths, and to 7ths, which matters when you talk about maintaining depth and continuing to build the roster. Of course, nothing like this happens in a vacuum. If the Lions were to make a move of this magnitude, there would have to be a clear plan in place at offensive tackle. Giving up the 17th pick likely means you're not addressing that position in round 1, which puts pressure on Taylor Decker's situation and forces you to think about developing a tackle later in the draft who can sit and learn. There's also the very real possibility that a trade of this size wouldn't be limited to picks alone. When teams move superstars, they often want young, controllable talent back, and that opens the door to conversations about players like Alim McNeill or Brian Branch being included if the Raiders were to push for a player as part of the deal. That's where this gets uncomfortable, because now you're not just talking about future assets, you're talking about parting with pieces of your current core. Still, the emotional pull of this move is obvious, and it's rooted in how close this team feels. This roster is not rebuilding. This roster is knocking on the door. The Lions are close enough to taste a Super Bowl, and adding a player like Max Crosby could be the kind of move that pushes a very good defense into a truly terrifying one. An elite pass rusher doesn't just get sacks. He makes life easier for everyone behind him. He forces quicker throws, he creates mistakes, and he elevates the secondary without a single coverage adjustment. In a division as competitive as the NFC North, that kind of edge can be the difference between surviving January and watching it from home. That sense of urgency is amplified by other realities on this roster. David Montgomery's comments are genuinely encouraging because they suggest he understands exactly what this offense is and wants to be part of it. He knows the Lions are going to run the football. He knows how he fits next to Jahmyr Gibbs, and his desire to stay makes life easier for Brad Holmes, even if the final decision isn't Montgomery's keeping. That balance in the backfield matters, because asking Gibbs to carry the entire load over a full season is a recipe for wearing him down when you need him most. At the same time, there's a darker undercurrent that can't be ignored, and that's the situation surrounding Kerby Joseph. The discussion about his knee and the mention of stem cell treatment is not casual or minor. Articular cartilage damage is one of the most difficult things to overcome in sports. And when you're already talking about extreme measures, it signals that the long-term outlook is shaky. Kerby himself has essentially acknowledged that we may be looking at a window of 1 or 2 more years, and that's devastating to hear. It also changes the math. If his career is potentially shortened, the Lions are officially in a defined window with him, and that makes the idea of going Elon feel far more logical than reckless. It also means Detroit has to start thinking about drafting and developing a safety sooner rather than later. On top of all that, Carlton Davis's explanation for why he didn't re-sign offers a revealing look into how this organization operates. His departure wasn't about bitterness or broken relationships, it was about contract language and terms. He spoke positively about Detroit, about Brad Holmes and Dan Campbell, about the honesty and directness of the process that matters. Players notice when an organization treats them like adults and doesn't hide behind empty promises. The fact that Davis still speaks highly of the Lions says a lot about how this team is viewed around the league, and that reputation plays a role when stars start looking at where they want to go next. All of this circles back to the same core question. The Lions have a window, they have momentum, and they have credibility as a well-run organization. The opportunity to add a player like Max Crosby may never come again in this exact form. Is this the kind of moment where you push your chips into the middle of the table, or is the cost simply too high, even with a Super Bowl within reach? What do you think the Lions should do here? Because once you accept that this window is real, the entire conversation changes from fear of losing draft picks to to fear of missing your moment. That's the part some fans struggle with, and honestly, it's understandable. Lions fans have been conditioned for decades to protect the future, to hoard picks, to avoid risk, because the payoff rarely came. But this version of the Lions is different, and the league itself is telling you that. When a player of Max Crosby's caliber is openly linked to Detroit as his preferred destination, that's not normal Lions history. That's respect. That's the result of winning, culture, and credibility. You also have to zoom out and look at the defense as it currently stands. Adding Crosby isn't just about sack totals, it's about collapsing pockets, forcing offenses to slide protection, and freeing up everyone else along the line. It's about making life easier for the linebackers and turning contested throws into turnover opportunities for the secondary. This is the kind of move that can hide weaknesses and amplify strengths at the same time. When you hear people say this would take the defense over the top, that's not hype, that's football reality. And yes, there is risk. Losing the 17th pick hurts, losing a future second rounder hurts. Draft picks are cheap, controllable talent, and Brad Holmes has proven he can draft extremely well. That's the strongest argument against making the move. If you believe Holmes can continue to find core players through the draft, you might argue patience is still the smarter path. But patience only works if the window stays open long enough, and that's where the Kirby Joseph situation casts a long shadow. When a key defensive piece is openly talking about a potentially shortened career, that's not something you can brush aside. That's a clock ticking louder than most fans want to admit. There's also the reality of the NFC. Nothing is guaranteed year to year. Injuries happen. Contracts get expensive. Teams adjust. What feels wide open today can slam shut quickly. The Lions have Jared Goff playing efficient football, an elite offensive line, a dynamic backfield, and young stars at premium positions. That combination doesn't last forever. When you stack that reality against the possibility of adding one of the league's most feared edge rushers, the logic behind an aggressive move becomes very hard to ignore. What makes this even more fascinating is that even attempting the trade sends a message. If Detroit makes the call, engages seriously, and ultimately gets outbid, most fans can live with that. Trying and failing is very different from never stepping into the arena. The frustration would come from sitting back while another contender pulls the trigger, especially if the price ends up being comparable to what the Lions could have offered. That's why so many fans are saying the same thing. Attempt it, push, see how far it goes. Because not trying is the only outcome that feels unacceptable when you believe your team is this close. At the same time, the organization's recent history with players like Carlton Davis shows that Holmes and Campbell won't make moves just to satisfy noise. They value structure, honesty, and long-term health. If they decide the price compromises too much of the roster's foundation, they'll walk away. And if that happens, it won't be because they were afraid, it'll be because they believed there was a better path forward. That trust has been earned, even if fans don't always like the answer in the moment. So this is where we are. A legitimate superstar potentially available, a roster built to win now, encouraging signs on offense with David Montgomery wanting to stay, alarming signs on defense with Kirby Joseph's knee, and a front office that has to decide whether this is the moment to go all in or stay the course. This isn't a simple yes or no, and there isn't a single right answer that guarantees success. Because even after the CTA, the discussion itself doesn't really stop. This rumor has legs precisely because it forces Lions fans to confront something unfamiliar, being a destination team instead of a hopeful one. For years, Detroit lived in the margins of these conversations, watching stars get linked to contenders while the Lions were treated as a rebuilding footnote. That's not what's happening here. This time, the Lions are being talked about as the place a premier defensive player actively wants to go, and that alone reflects how far this organization has come. Another layer that can't be ignored is how a move like this would signal belief inside the locker room. Players know when management is serious about winning now. They feel it when draft picks are moved for proven talent. If you're a veteran grinding through a season, knowing the front office is willing to make uncomfortable decisions to chase a Super Bowl matters. It reinforces being, it reinforces sacrifice, and it reinforces that the standard has shifted from building to finishing. At the same time, this is where Brad Holmes' discipline becomes the focal point. He's built this roster by refusing to panic and by consistently finding value throughout the draft. That track record is why this decision carries so much weight. If he pulls the trigger, it tells you he believes the risk is justified. If he doesn't, it tells you he believes the roster still has another gear without mortgaging premium picks. Either way, it's not inaction, it's conviction. There's also the strategic ripple effect to consider. Adding Max Crosby doesn't just change Detroit's defense, it changes how opponents prepare for Detroit. Protection schemes shift, play calling tightens, quarterbacks speed up, and when that happens, mistakes follow. That's how turnovers happen, and turnovers are how playoff games swing. When margins are razor-thin in January, a single disrupted drive can be the difference between advancing and going home. But the clock is the real villain here. Kirby Joseph's situation puts a timeline on this defense that can't be ignored. The idea that you might only have 1 or 2 more seasons of him at anything close to full strength changes the calculus dramatically. Windows in the NFL don't announce themselves politely. They close suddenly. Teams that hesitate often realize too late that the moment passed quietly while they were planning for tomorrow. That's why this conversation keeps circling back to the same truth. This isn't about reckless spending, it's about intentional aggression. Attempting the trade acknowledges the window. Failing doesn't damage the franchise. Refusing to try, however, risks regret if the opportunity disappears and the roster ages out of alignment. So as this rumor continues to swirl, remember what it actually represents. Not just Max Crosby, not just draft picks, it represents belief, urgency, and the uncomfortable transition from hopeful contender to legitimate threat. That transition is where franchises either evolve or stall. Because even beyond all the noise, what really defines this moment is how rare it is for everything to line up at once. You don't often see a team with a stable front office, a clear identity, real playoff expectations, and an external opportunity to add a true difference maker at the same time. Most franchises get maybe one shot like this before circumstances change, contracts inflate, injuries pile up, coordinators get poached, and suddenly the same roster doesn't feel quite as powerful as it did a year earlier. That's the quiet danger here. Standing still in the NFL is often just another way of moving backward. This is also why the idea of overpaying has to be framed correctly. Draft picks only matter if they turn into players who impact games at the highest level. Max Crosby already does that every single week. There is no developmental curve, there is no waiting period. You plug him in, and the defense instantly plays faster, nastier, and more confident. That certainty is incredibly valuable when you're chasing a championship, and it's something draft picks, no matter how exciting, can't promise. But none of this means the Lions are desperate. That's an important distinction. Desperate teams make sloppy moves. This wouldn't be that. This would be a calculated decision rooted in understanding the roster's timeline. David Montgomery wanting to stay reinforces offensive continuity. The offensive line is still the backbone of this team. Jared Goff is steady. The run game is reliable. Those pieces give you a foundation. The concern comes on the defensive side, where health and longevity questions are starting to surface. That's where a player like Crosby doesn't just add talent, he adds insurance against uncertainty. It's also worth noting how this front office communicates. Carlton Davis' comments matter more than some people realize. When a departing player speaks positively about transparency and respect, it sends a message to current players and future targets. Detroit isn't viewed as chaotic or misleading, it's viewed as direct and professional. That reputation is part of why conversations like this even exist. Players talk, agents talk, and when a team is known for honesty, it earns consideration.